some issues that came up tangential to the audit that, in the views of the auditor, were more appropriate for legal review than an audit review. And the one that rose to the attention of our office and then brought to the attention of the board involved the payment of overtime. So members of the public, you heard sort of a list of tasks. When the board officers and superintendent were talking to the auditors, they identified a potential concern with the payment of overtime. It was the view of the auditors that that was a legal assessment, not an auditor's assessment. That was sent to our office. And so the question, quite frankly, was whether or not the individuals to whom overtime had been paid during the period in question were entitled to that overtime. Very simply stated, employees would fall into two categories as far as entitlement to overtime is concerned. The first involves individuals who are not in an administrative role who work more than 40 hours in a week. And the second is based upon your collective bargaining agreement. Is there a contractual entitlement to additional pays? Probably the example most commonly understood is if a teacher has to cover a classroom because there isn't a substitute available, but the teacher has to give up some of their free period to cover a classroom, they're entitled to payment for that, right? So there's the standards under state and federal law. If you're entitled to overtime, there's the contractual entitlement. The question put to our office is, was there anybody who would fall outside of those two groups who was getting overtime? We were able to identify two such circumstances. The amount of money over the period of time was not significant, but the bottom line, since it involves public money, is we provided insights to the business office to make sure that it understood you simply cannot pay overtime to people who are not entitled to it. The folks we're talking about were induced to do the work. They were promised the overtime. They were given the overtime. So there's certainly no question from our standpoint as to whether any employees were doing anything wrong. But so much of what this analysis involved from an auditor standpoint, from a legal standpoint, corrective action, make sure you have your house in order, and moving forward, you're doing everything the way it's supposed to be done. So we have confidence now that the business office has an understanding, which I have greatly simplified for the purposes of this presentation, in terms of overtime entitlement and the converse, that if you don't fall into those categories, you cannot be providing overtime. So that was the legal issue. And then I guess the second legal issue, which was not originally on the radar when the audit commenced, but came on the radar within recent weeks, involved the accrual of vacation days. This, too, is clearly a legal issue. It's covered by a statute that was passed about 12 years ago. In essence, it limits the carryover of vacation days for folks hired after that time to the amount of vacation days earned in the prior year, right? So if, hypothetically speaking, you had 10 vacation days a year in year one, you didn't use any of them. You get 10 vacation days in year two. You don't use any of them. Those are 20 days. When year three begins, you have no more than 20 days on the books, so you're never going to have more than 2 days on the books. There were, I believe, approximately 18 employees who had more vacation days on the books than is permitted by law, so the administration is in the process of letting those employees know that. Once again, I want to make clear, there's no assertion by anyone whatsoever that the employees were doing anything wrong. They had the days on the books that they were told were available to them, but in 18 cases, the amount was in excess of that permitted by law. So we're dealing with that in some cases to the extent the employees are represented by a union. I'm sure we'll be discussing it with union officials, maybe union attorneys, but this is not really the board's issue, right? There's a law, you're either in compliance with it or you're not. Spoiler alert, we've advised our client to be in compliance with the law. So we will address that going forward. And again, at the encouragement of the superintendent and board president, bringing that to the attention of the public, something else that we are looking to remedy and make sure is correct going forward. And we are in the process of doing that because it's a relatively recent issue compared to all the other ones that Mr. Allison and I have identified. And that